Hi guys, hello, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be doing our February reading wrap up, and I feel like we are like well into March at this point, so I feel like it might be a little late to be doing this, but better late than never. And like last month, we are going to be doing some stats before we actually like jump into the books, just to kind of like keep myself on track with like my reading goals. But then also I had one of you guys actually ask me if I ever did like updates on the TBRs that we pulled together, and I've never really done that, but I think it'd be a fun idea, so I'm gonna start doing it in these videos, because sometimes when I film my TBR jars for the next month, I do it like a week, sometimes like close to 2 weeks before the actual month ends. Usually I'm not done with the month of reading yet, so I can't really update in those videos, so we're gonna do it in these ones instead, if that makes any sense. It's also probably information you didn't care to have. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into our stats, and we're gonna start with the total books that I read, which was 13. You guys, I am, if I do say so myself, kind of crushing it. Obviously every single month it like varies how many books I read, but I feel like on average I've been reading like 8 to 9 books a month. But for this year so far we've done 12 and now 13. And honestly I feel like that has a lot to do with the fact that I have been purposely trying to include audiobooks and reading more on my Kindle. Maybe not necessarily my Kindle so much, because that still requires me to like really focus on it, but like as far as audiobooks, it's just so easy to like squeeze in a couple extra books every month, because I just listen to them like while I'm getting ready in the morning, or if I'm cleaning or something like that. Which, speaking of, kind of our next stat is kind of like how those books, those 13 books, were kind of like broken down, like what type of reading I did. 3 of them were audiobooks, 7 of them were Kindle books, so we really utilized our Kindle this last month, and then only 3 of them were physical books. So February was definitely the month of Kindle and audio, specifically Kindle. Then as far as like our other really like main goal that I have for the year is to read my physical TBR. Even though I did only read 3 physical books, 2 of the books that I listened to on audio were books that I physically own. So technically we still finished 5 books on my physical TBR, which is good. Not the best, but good. And then the very last kind of like stat that I wanted to go over was actually our TBR jar picks, which I, kind of talked about earlier. In total, I left that video with 8 books on my TBR, and we started 4 of them, but only finished 2 of them, which definitely isn't great. But to be fair, the other 2 that I didn't finish, we are still working our way through. But anyway, those are kind of like all the stats that I have for you. But before we actually like jump into the books finally, I do only have like one little extra note for you, which is I'm immediately not going to talk about one of them, which is Glow from the Plated Prisoner series. That's the 4th book in that series, and I'm not going to talk about it in this video just because I talked about that series just kind of like in general in my last reading wrap up, so I don't want to really talk about it again. My thoughts are pretty much the same. With that being said, let's go ahead and finally jump into our 12 other books that we read. The first book that we finished in February was All of Us Villains, and this is one of the books that I listened to on audio, even though I have it physically, because this was actually a reread. It took about a year after I finished this book for the paperback version of the second book to be released, and then once I got my hands on that second book, it took me probably like another year before I picked it up again. And by then I like completely forgot about everything that happened in this book, so I needed to reread it, and that is honestly not something that I really like to do, but I came across it on the Libby app, and honestly I kind of liked my experience listening to it better than I did reading it physically, and I feel like I remember a lot more of it now. Maybe it's just because I have read it / listened to it twice already. This book is basically about 7 families where how often is it? It says every blood moon, which I think is like every 20 years or something like that. It said one member of each of the families is kind of presented to fight in a tournament to basically have control over high magic, because in this world everyone kind of has the ability to obtain magic, but they need to harness it through these rings or jewelry or whatever. They cast specific spells into them and things like that, which is really fun. And it just so happens that whenever the blood moon happens, they end up like putting teenage members of their families into this tournament, and not only just one of them wins to like control the magic, but like the other 6 members die. And I feel like the first half of this book or so just kind of like follows all of our characters during kind of like the weeks prior to the tournament actually happening. They're kind of like preparing themselves in different ways, because some families are like better off than others. Some people have like bad reputations and things like that. So you're kind of getting backstories on all the members of this tournament, but also like their families and kind of like the dynamics between the families and things like that. So it's really, really interesting in that sense. But then also the second half of it is the actual tournament, which so much happens and it's super, super fun. The only thing I would say about this book is definitely make sure you have the second one to read right after this, because this one doesn't end necessarily on a cliffhanger, but it literally ends like in the middle of the tournament. Like it's still going on. And I remember the first time around that drove me absolutely insane. I was like, why would you start a tournament and then just like not finish it in a book? And it has been a month since I finished this one, and I still have not picked up the second one. And I think it's just because I would really prefer to listen to it. So I'm kind of just like trying to figure out a free way to do that. Anyway, I feel like I've been talking about this book forever. So that is All of Us Villains. Highly recommend. Moving on to our next book, which is Den and Dusted by Lila Sage. I actually read this one in a Valentine's Day like reading vlog. I've already given all of my thoughts and my feelings and all those things about this book in that video. So if you want to check out my thoughts on that, check out that video. That being said though, the next few books that I have are all from the same series that I also started in that same reading vlog, but I am going to talk about those books a little bit in this video because I only kind of like feel like I scratched the surface in my reading vlog. I feel like I didn't talk about it as much as I could have, but then also again, I read more books in the series after that video. So we're going to talk about those, but basically those 3 books are from the Cowboy Colony Mail Order Bride series by Ursa Dax, which is a crazy name for a series, but the actual books in the series are Married to the Alien Cowboy, which is the one that I read in my reading vlog, and then we have Wrangled by the Alien Rancher, and then Resisting the Alien Rider. Basically about a group of aliens that were kind of exiled from their community when they were children because they were evicted felons, and you do learn those individual like backstories when you get into the books, so I'm not gonna like spoil anything, but they were convicted felons as children and were sent off to this like desert planet or whatever, and they were each given like kind of like their own ranches to live in and maintain and grow like crops and things like that for the colony back home. And this is kind of like their prison sentence essentially. But now that they're all kind of like adults, the people in charge, I guess, feel like they're kind of like ready to have like a semblance of normalcy and are providing them with wives basically, but because they are convicted felons, they don't want to send like their own people over there, so they get like voluntary human recruits to come and marry these alien cowboys. And basically each book in the series is kind of like the backstory between the alien, like why he's a felon, but then also the backstory of like why the human is like volunteering for this, and them kind of like getting to know each other and getting married, because basically the second the humans like touch foot on the planet, they marry the cowboy. Like it's not like a get to know you situation, it's just like, here's your alien, you're married now. Which is honestly kind of one of my favorite things. I love a forced proximity. I love people kind of being stuck together and like being forced to kind of get to know each other and figure each other out. It always makes for like the best tension. It's so fun. And this series in particular, like the whole setup of it, and I mean even the name of the series sounds so spicy. Like I went into this thinking it was going to be like a super spicy, smutty series, and it's really not. Like there is some spice, but there's really only a couple scenes per book, and they're at the very end. And honestly, the overall tone of the books is just a lot more playful. Absolutely obsessed with this series. And actually, one of you guys that I like talk to a lot on here, on my last video, my spring releases video where I talked about the fact that the 4th book in this series is coming out, one of you guys commented and said that basically you were also really excited for that 4th book, and I just think that is so fun because like one of you guys recommended it to me, I read it, really enjoyed it, talked about it, and then another one of you guys saw that, read it as well, and is also like super excited to continue the series. So it was just like a big circle of just like reading. Anyway, moving on. The next book that we read was The Dragon's Bride by Katie Robert, and this is actually one of those books that is more of what I thought the Cowboy Colony series was going to be. This is a spicy, smutty, kind of like erotica book, and I loved it. And it kind of honestly has a little bit of a similar premise. This one is about a group of a few humans that make deals with a devil. I don't know the backstories of the other females. I'm assuming that we're going to get those within the rest of the series because this is the first book in a series. But as far as this one goes, she was kind of married to just like a really awful person. So she made the deal with the devil to get away from him. And in exchange for this deal, her and the other humans are put up for auction for these monsters to basically bid on them, and they would become their wives. And again, as far as this book goes, our human, Briar is her name, she is married off to Soul, who is a dragon. Not a dragon shifter, a full-on dragon. I've never read a romance between like a human and like a legit just creature before, and I didn't know if that was gonna like weird me out, but it didn't. I mean, they obviously have very kind of like human mannerisms, and like their bodies are mostly human-ish. And as you can see, this is like a really thin book, so there wasn't like a whole lot of plot going on. It was basically just her and him kind of like getting to know each other and things like that. I mean, he's going into it kind of with like a more positive, like we're gonna make this work kind of mindset, whereas she's just like, what is going on? And I think honestly that's really all I have to say about it. I really enjoyed it. Also, I mean, cover of this book is so pretty. It's literally 100% of the reason why I got it. I am definitely wanting to continue the series. The only reason I haven't is just because I don't own the rest of the books, and they are like $11 to $14 a piece depending on which one you're getting, and I am gonna book buying ban right now, so I can't really buy any books at the moment. Next book that I read was Viciously Yours, and this was another Kindle book that I read this month, and this was another one that I was super obsessed with. This was so good. So this is by Jamie Applegate Hunter, and the whole kind of like concept behind this one is basically a 13-year-old Fae boy finds out who his mate is, but it happens to be a human, and because he's like the heir to the throne, he can't actually go through the barrier between the Fae and the humans until he takes the throne. But in this world specifically, like once you find your mate, the mate gets found and then brought to the boy, and they kind of like grow up together and like, you know, fall in love and whatnot. But because she's a human and he can't cross the barrier, he's not able to be with his mate. So instead he ends up sending her like letters and presents every year on her birthday and things like that until he takes the throne at 25 and is able to finally cross the border. And I was really hoping kind of going into the book that you would get a lot of that kind of like lead up of like the letters and the presents and stuff like that. And this definitely did not disappoint. You got so much of them to the point where I was actually like ready for it to progress. Not that it was like too much, but I feel like it was like the perfect amount. Like they gave you a really good amount of like them kind of like getting to know each other. I was gonna say like building tension, but it doesn't really do that because I mean they're children for most of the letters. But you do get like kind of the progression of like a 13-year-old boy to the progression of like he's a teenager and he is kind of starting to flirt, to then he's in his 20s and he's starting to become a little unhinged. He does some crazy things where I was like, what is happening? But also like I ate it up. I loved every second of it. So yeah, highly recommend. Next up we have Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. And although I do have the physical copy of this book, this is another one that I listened to on audio. This one is a thriller about a girl who as a child lived in this house with her family. Like they had just moved into this house. Shortly after they move, they end up fleeing from the house because of like these haunted things that happened in the house, and her dad actually ends up writing a whole book about it. They become like a famous family because of all the crazy things that supposedly happened in this house. And when you kind of like start off the book, it's actually in the perspective of the daughter, who's now an adult herself, and she has inherited this house that she didn't even realize her family still owned. And this was another one I feel like that was really fun to listen to. You had only one narrator, but it did have different timelines. You got kind of like a dual perspective of Maggie as an adult kind of dealing with the house in present day. Like she's moved into the house to kind of like renovate it because that's like what she does as a job. But then you get the perspective of her dad when she was a kid and they were living in the house and kind of like his experiences. And that was just really fun to kind of get the back and forth with that. And the ending of this definitely took me by surprise, which I really appreciated. I don't mind if I guess the ending of like thrillers and murder mysteries and things like that, because the entire time I'm reading them, I'm trying to figure it out. And when I do figure it out, I'm like patting myself on the back, you know what I mean? So I definitely don't mind if I'm correct, but like this one I had no idea. If you like kind of like a haunted house type of vibe, I would definitely recommend this book. Next up we have another book that I listened to on audio, which is Someone Else's Shoes, which is just like kind of like a contemporary fiction. It's basically about two women who are at the same gym and their gym bags end up getting switched. And it's kind of like one of those like live in someone else's shoes type of scenario, or that's at least what I thought kind of going into it. But this book went in all kinds of crazy directions. You have one woman who has a very average life, but then you have the other woman who has a very privileged life. She's married to a super rich dude and some craziness happens. I really don't want to give anything away, but it was completely different than I thought it was going to be. And this is actually a pretty long book. I think it was like a 12-hour audiobook, which for like a contemporary fiction about two women switching their gym bags was not what I was expecting. Like I thought it was just gonna be like this fun, cute, little lighthearted, live life in someone else's shoes kind of vibe. I mean, they did literally wear each other's shoes because of like the different circumstances that happened, but like it was just a long journey of all kinds of like twists and turns, and it was a good time. I had a lot of fun with this book. And now, last but certainly not least, we have The Confidence of Wildflowers, which I did actually end up not only reading the first book, but I read the second book. This is kind of like a duet. And then I also read the novella, which technically I read that in like the very beginning of March. It was the first book I read in March. But we're going to talk about the entire series in this one video because that just makes more sense to me. This is an age gap romance. The age gap is 13 years, which honestly doesn't really seem that crazy. However, the character in this book in particular is like freshly 18. And that was one of the reasons, like overall, I absolutely loved this series. And I did actually enjoy the age gap more than I realized I would. So I definitely want to look for more age gap romances. But the fact that she was 18 specifically did kind of cringe me out a little bit in the first book. I'm not going to give anything away, but like there is a time jump between the first book and the second book. So in the second book, it didn't bother me at all anymore because, you know, everyone's older. But the fact that she was 18 in that first book really was like in the back of my mind the entire time. So it was kind of hard for me to really get into it because it was just, I don't know, there's a big difference in my opinion between somebody being in like their early 20s and dating someone older and being 18. Like she just graduated high school, her boyfriend was going off to college, like the much older man being interested in someone that literally was just in a classroom. That being said, again, I did really enjoy this series. And I do feel like the progression of our main character's relationship was very slow. And I do feel like that kind of like helped with, you know, as the reader to be, or to like feel okay with their relationship, because it was very slow. It was more of just like two people kind of like struggling with things, and they're kind of just like connecting over that struggle a little bit, but then also just kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to like say too much, but a lot of things happen in the book. There is one thing that happens, and I did like put an update on my Goodreads. I think that literally just said like, what the because there is something that happens in it that I am still like, when I think about it, I'm just devastated. If you have read that book, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Like it was such like an abrupt kind of like, why did this have to happen kind of a thing? And that definitely does carry into the other two books as well. And it's just, that still like bothers me. I don't think I've ever read a book where something like that has happened. And it definitely was like, it took me aback. And I think that's really all I have to say about that first book. And then again, in the second one, there is a time jump. So that one I didn't struggle at all with like feeling weird about it. And I was able to kind of like really focus on the romance and stuff. And that one was also really good. And then as far as like the novella, we have another little bit of a time jump. And that one is basically just kind of honestly extra, which actually I think the author said that in the little note for the novella. I think she like dedicated it to, or like wrote it in an author's note or something, basically saying like, this is for all the people that want more. There is kind of like a point of tension or like a little hump that they have to get over, but it's nothing like crazy. It's really just like a cute little like extra to the series. Overall, I did really enjoy the series. It's kind of like made me want to read more kind of like real life style romances, but then also some more age gap romances. So if you have any recommendations for age gap romances, please leave them in the comments. With that, those are all of the books that I read in February. I feel like January went really well, February went really well. March so far has been kind of slower, if I'm gonna be honest. But I do have a couple of books, like I said, that I am still working on from February that I will hopefully finish in March. And I did just start another book, The Unseelie Prince, if you're curious. I was actually really close to DNFing it last night, but I wanted to like at least give it 50 pages, and literally on like that 50th page, it finally was like giving me what I needed it to give me to at least give it a little bit longer. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, that is everything that I have for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys have had the most amazing of days, and I will hopefully see you in my next one. Bye.